This May, we're finally getting the long-awaited return of a beloved franchise, Final Destination, after an absence of almost a decade and a half. So today, I wanted to talk to you guys about Final Destination Bloodlines, and really just the franchise as a whole. Hey, what's up everybody? Nick here, and today I want to talk to you guys about Final Destination. Now, if you are a 90s kid like me, if that's when you were born and raised, then you probably have fond memories of the very first Final Destination film from 2000. I remember seeing that movie as a kid. I was definitely not even 10 years old yet, and it kind of changed me forever. Now, yeah, I want to talk about Bloodlines today, and we're going to get there, but I kind of want to tee this video off just looking back at this series and what it did to an entire generation of people. See, I feel like if you're Gen Z now, or even younger than that, you probably just don't really know or don't really care. Final Destination has not been in theaters since 2011, so if you're a late teenager or you're in your early 20s, you probably aren't all that familiar with this series. And that breaks my heart, because I genuinely feel like Final Destination changed a lot of people's lives, and not for the better. And I can speak to that through experience with my family and myself. See, Final Destination was just a great concept from the very beginning. A main character has a premonition that then allows them to avoid their own death. And then death becomes an entity in and of itself and wants revenge for this person messing up their plan. And that's really cool, because we've never really had the personification of death. And we don't in these movies either. But honestly, there might as well be, because death moves throughout these movies, both literally and figuratively. Final Destination started off with a premonition of a plane crash, something that a lot of people feared, and was actually really topical in the late 90s, early 2000s because of TWA flight, I believe 800, that went down over the Atlantic and over 200 people died. Now, I don't really remember news coverage of that or anything when I was a kid, but my mom told me all about it. It was a huge deal, and it's honestly kind of weird to talk about that now with what's been happening the last couple weeks with aviation in this country. So in the year 2000, flying commercially was probably a genuine fear of a lot of people. So for a movie like this to come out and its whole opening, its big salvo at the beginning is, hey, a plane's going to blow up and everybody's going to die, that had to scare a lot of people. And I can tell you it scared the crap out of me. I was terrified of flying, just the idea of flying for the longest time. I didn't take my first flight until I was 18 years old. And I'll never forget on my 18th birthday being on the runway taking off, just kind of gripping the seat and like closing my eyes on takeoff, because I was like, am I really doing this? Am I really putting myself in a position where this thing could blow up and I could die and be like, oh my God, I'm living Final Destination. Like, people are going to read news stories about me, and anybody that knows me is going to be like, oh yeah, he was scared of that. Like, flying was a fear of his. And I'm glad to say it's not a fear of mine anymore. And I'm actually one of the weird psychos that likes turbulence to a degree. Like, I think it's kind of fun. But at that point in my life, and for 2 decades of my life, it was terrifying. It was a terrifying thought. And I owe that fear entirely to Final Destination. And then, not to be outdone, a couple years later, Final Destination 2 comes out. And it takes a very real fear that a lot of people have and puts it front and center at the beginning of its movie, which is a massive pileup. A car accident that would cause death, mass casualty event. Look, I think that's a rational fear that most people have in their day-to-day lives when they're driving anywhere. You may trust yourself as a driver, but that doesn't mean you trust everybody around you. You could be in total control and your life could still be taken from you. Final Destination 2 puts that on display, front and center at the beginning of the movie. And it changed the way everybody drove on the freeway after that. Nobody drives behind log trucks anymore. Absolutely nobody. The fact that seeing a log truck has become a viral meme and is just an instant fear. Like, it instantly gets everybody to go, oh, yep, no way, not doing that. That says all it needs to say, and all you need to know about the effectiveness of Final Destination 2. Final Destination 2's opening is the strongest in the series, in my opinion, from a technological standpoint and from the amount of carnage that is shown on screen. Final Destination 2 took everything the first movie did and did it better, in my opinion. It added a flair of comedy to the film that it sorely needed, especially after the first one being so dour. And I think Final Destination 2 is unequivocally the best movie in the series. And then following that up was Final Destination 3, playing off of a very real fear of roller coasters. And again, Another fear that I had, solely created by this movie. I've told this story many times, and if you're familiar with Ohio, you know Kings Island. It's an amusement park, and I lived 10 minutes away from it pretty much my entire life. And when I was in 7th grade, I went to Fear Fest, which is what they would do in October for Halloween. And I went with a group of girls, one of which I had a crush on. And I was terrified of roller coasters, and they wanted to ride a ride called the Vortex, which had 6 inversions in it. Now look, this was the year Final Destination 3 was prescient in everybody's mind. It had just come out on home video. I had seen it. I was terrified by the opening sequence, and I already had a general fear of roller coasters, especially ones that went upside down. But I didn't want to be a bitch. So I said, yeah, let's do it. I can't tell you what it was like to sit in that seat with my palms sweating as badly as they were and being terrified going up that chain link hill, thinking, oh, this is it. This is it. I'm putting myself in another situation that I've seen play out in a movie. I should not be doing this. I went down that hill and it changed my life. It made me love roller coasters. I adored that ride. It became my favorite ride at Kings Island, and they have recently taken it down, and I hate them so much, but it was also very similar to Devil's Flight in that movie. It is the exact same type of roller coaster, the same exact type of overhead restraints. It was almost identical, like aside from the color, and I was like, this is terrifying. And having rewatched Final Destination 3 just a couple days ago, I can say that the opening is still effective, and it's still a very real fear to play off of. However, I don't think it is as strong as some of the other movies in this series. I think it actually may be the second weakest in the series. But it did a lot of what the first 2 movies did, but it just didn't do it as well. It wasn't as fun, and it just didn't feel like the stakes were as high. And that led us to The Final Destination, the 4th film, which was being billed as the last movie in the series. And at the time, a lot of people were upset because this, up to that point, had been a very successful series, and I had really enjoyed it up to that point. But I have a beef with this movie, and I have a vendetta, and I've talked about this vendetta for years. Came out the same weekend as Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and it won the box office over Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 by a hair. Now, I largely attribute that to 3D pricing, because this was still the lowest grossing movie in the Final Destination series up to that point. It had kind of waned. People didn't really seem to care about Final Destination anymore. And then I watched it, and I was really pissed off, because I loved Halloween 2, and I wanted to see that movie be more successful. And it lost out to this movie, which I find to be atrocious, absolutely awful. From the opening sequence that takes place at a racetrack, which, I'm sorry, that's just not as realistic as of a fear. I don't think a lot of people go to those things anymore, especially just your random ones in town. You know, if it's Daytona 500 or something, I get it. But even then, I just don't feel like it's a fear that a lot of people are going to have. They're not going to put themselves into that situation. Most Americans aren't. It's not an everyday thing. So I already thought that was just a stupid idea to start the movie off with. And the fact that the effects are just so bad. I mean, so bad. The CGI is terrible. And they also really lean into the 3D here, and I get it because it was shot with 3D cameras. But if you're not watching this movie in 3D, it looks especially awful. You don't really get to know or care about any of the characters. Most of the performances are bad, and a lot of the kill scenes are just bad. It's a bad movie from start to finish. I just watched it again last week, and I actually was falling asleep at the end. It did not grab me at all. I think the movie is terrible. And I think that if this was the last Final Destination movie, they'd have only themselves to blame because they delivered such a dog shit movie. But then in 2011, Final Destination 5 came out, and like many others, I was skeptical. I did not believe that they could resurrect after that dog shit film. I'm happy to say that Final Destination 5 is definitely an improvement over that one, and I would put it smack dab in the middle of my franchise ranking. See, Final Destination 5 has a more realistic mass casualty event at the beginning with a bridge collapse, but still it doesn't play like the first 3 movies. But again, not really their fault, and that even goes with the 4th film because you run out of everyday mass casualty events that you could do eventually. So you have to stretch it a little bit. However, some issues with Final Destination 5 are that, again, a lot of the effects, especially because they're supposed to be in 3D, when you watch it in 2D, they just don't look very good. There's a lot of characters in here, too, that I think give subpar performances, but there's enough decent ones there that you can actually get behind your lead here and his girlfriend. I actually love, like everybody else does, the ending tie-in to the very first movie. That was one of those oh shit moments. Like, so many people saw that, and that made the movie for them. And I get it. because it did for me too. And I watched it again last week and I said, you know what? I wasn't really into the movie until the third act. I didn't hate it like the fourth film that I actively hated, but I was just kind of going through the motions. And then when the third act came, I was like, okay. Now, we also got to see Tony Todd come back for the first time since the second film, although we did get his voice in the third film, I know. So I think there was just more cachet to this movie. And bringing it back to what started the series, I liked that a lot. So Final Destination 5 was actually a pretty decent film, and it was a way to kind of course correct from where the franchise had been going wrong in recent years. And that brings us to where we are today. See, it's been almost 15 years since we've had anything out of this franchise. And in just a couple months, we're going to be getting the 6th film in the series in theaters, Final Destination Bloodlines. And it's got a lot of people asking questions, but I think most importantly, it just has a lot of people excited. I can tell you guys, I genuinely don't know what to expect from this movie. I don't know what the big mass casualty event at the beginning of the movie is going to be, but I have to have hope it's going to be better than the last two movies. Although I did like Final Destination 5, as I said, I felt like that one was kind of iffy, especially the effects. We also know that we're getting Tony Todd back in what is probably his last filmed role before he passed away. So that'll be really bittersweet, but I've also heard that we're going to get more to his character. And I'm really excited about that because that's a character that they just haven't mined well enough. Honestly, just call him Death. Like, screw it. Like, he's just the personification of death. That's what we've all thought for years anyway. So that's cool. But then there's this thing about the tagline that really has me scratching my head. Death runs in the family. What does that mean? Look, if you ask me, selfishly, I want to see this movie tie back into those previous movies. I really, really do. I don't want this to serve as a reboot. I know it's been almost 2 decades and they're probably tempted to do that, and maybe they did. You know, aside from Tony Todd being here, maybe that's really all the connective tissue there is. I hope not, because with that tagline, it just makes me think, is this a relative of somebody that died in a previous movie or survived in a previous movie? Is this event going to be somehow tied into a previous one, a previous character that escaped death's plan? Who's to say? But it's definitely got me wondering. And I also think Final Destination works best when each movie isn't a standalone. It's no coincidence that the first 2 movies in this series are the strongest in the series, in my opinion. It's because they feel episodic. They truly feel like a 2-part story. Having returning characters and just revisiting old plot lines helps with that. So hopefully this movie's going to do that too. Because although Final Destination could serve really well as just an anthology series where every story is kind of a standalone, I don't think the fans at this point want that, and I don't think we would accept that. It makes it almost feel like everything we watched up to this point doesn't matter. See, this isn't like a Halloween movie or a Friday the 13th movie where you can take time off and then just kind of wipe the slate clean. No, we care about a lot of these characters. We care about these events. We care about Death's plan writ large, which means I feel like you have to keep that tissue there, and it's got to be truly a sequel in some form or fashion. And then the marketing of this movie is making me think that that's probably going to be the case as well, because they're not really showing us a peek behind the curtain. Even the first trailer that we got isn't even a trailer. It's a scene from the movie, supposedly a death scene. But I've also heard rumors that maybe it's not even in the movie. Now, I don't know about that because that was a pretty elaborate scene. But hey, I mean, I'd be shocked and surprised if it wasn't in the movie and that was all just a whet the appetite kind of thing that they put out online. But I just have to feel like there's a grander plan here. And I have to hope that too, because that's what I want to see. Look, Final Destination as a series has traumatized millions of people. It has tapped into some of the most primal fears that we have as human beings. It has made us look at things differently. You won't look at opening a can of food the same way again, or an airplane, or a roller coaster, or you won't even look at a log truck. Not even just the same way. You will not get behind it. That is important. That means something. That's how big of a deal this franchise is and how effective it's been in traumatizing audiences. So at this point, I will accept nothing less from the next movie. It should absolutely play off those same fears. It should absolutely be memorable, and it should give us a lot of what we've loved from most of these movies. But we have a few months to wait and see to find out. So I want to hear down below in the comment section what you guys think of Final Destination as a series. Did I nail all the points that you wanted me to, or am I missing something? Is there a movie that I maybe don't love in this series that you do? Comment down below and let me know. No matter what it is, I want to discuss this series with you guys because I'm excited for the new movie, and I hope you are too.